Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Thursday, October 24th, 2024. With under 2 weeks until Election Day, former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and former National Security Advisor Stephen Hadley discussed presidential administration transition national security concerns and what they think is going to happen this year. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic presidential nominee, picks up more endorsements from Republicans, and we'll hear Republican presidential nominee, former President Donald Trump, at a rally in Duluth, Georgia. There's a third-party presidential debate that happened last night featuring nominees Jill Stein from the Green Party, Chase Oliver from the Libertarian Party, and Randall Terry from the Constitution Party. Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, running for a fourth term, debates his Republican opponent, who makes a point of pointing out Senator Sanders is 83 years old. President Joe Biden issues a memo to increase artificial intelligence experimentation and deployment by the U.S. military and intelligence agencies in accordance with democratic values, so as not to fall behind competitors like China. We'll hear from the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan and National Economic Advisor Lael Brainerd, and talk with Washington Post technology reporter Garrett DeVink. Story from NBC News. The top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, is sounding the alarm over former President Donald Trump's failure to enter into key agreements with the Biden administration for the presidential transition process, warning that it could endanger the peaceful transfer of power and threaten U.S. national security. In a letter sent Wednesday to Trump and his vice presidential nominee, Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio, obtained by NBC News, Raskin warned that they are breaking the precedent set by every other presidential candidate since 2010 by not accepting resources provided by the federal government for a smooth transition. The Maryland Democrat said it appears Trump could be trying to flout fundraising reporting requirements and rules designed to prevent conflicts of interest in the upcoming administration. That was from NBC News. Today, Condoleezza Rice, former National Security Advisor and Secretary of State, and Stephen Hadley, former National Security Advisor, both serving under former President George W. Bush, discussed presidential transitions and national security in a webinar hosted by the Hoover Institution.
Steve, I want to close with a question that's been here in the chat and I think is on everybody's mind. We started by describing a transition where there was actually a contested election. It was a little bit of a high wire act for people trying to do the transition. But the truth of the matter is that everybody's a little worried about the transition this time around, likely another 50-50 election, and a lot of concerns about how peaceful that transfer is going to look and what are going to be the messages. And you mentioned the sense that abroad people are asking, is America really able for its institutions to function in the way that would allow the kind of really not just peaceful, but systematic and efficient transition that you started out by describing and that you've chronicled in Handoff, the book about the transitions. Any thinking about where we are and whether today's political environment will allow the kind of transition that we experienced in 2000 or that we were a part of in 2008, 2009? Are we gonna make it this time?
I think we're going to make it this time. I mean, look, the best case is if whoever is the incoming president and the outgoing president sit down in the Oval Office in front of the American people and say, the American people deserve a good transition between these administrations, and we here pledge to each other and to the American people, we are going to make this a first-class transition. That's the best case. And let's hope that's what the whoever wins the presidential election and President Biden decide to do. The second best is, I think, transitions even in disruptive circumstances, and 2000 was certainly a disruptive circumstance. The outgoing president at that time had really no interest, particularly in facilitating the transition to a new president whose election they denied had occurred. But notwithstanding that at the top, there were transitions that were fairly effective, I think, between agencies, between the professional staffs in the Defense Department, the State Department, and elsewhere. And even at the NSC staff, which is part of the White House operation, very close to the president, You officiated at a passing the baton ceremony at the U.S. Institute of Peace, did an interview with Robert O'Brien and Jake Sullivan, and Jake Sullivan publicly thanked Robert O'Brien for a transition support that helped him and his staff hit the ground running in 2020. So
Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor to President Trump,
who was, yes, as the outgoing National Security Advisor to Jake Sullivan, the incoming National Security Advisor. Notwithstanding the disruption of that period of time in 2020, they managed to have a transition arrangement, which I think Jake Sullivan found very useful, and that Robert O'Brien took a great deal of pride in having achieved. So it can still happen even in fairly disruptive circumstances.
Yes, I think American institutions are pretty remarkable, and we count on them. I think we also count on the American people expecting a lot of those that they elect.
Condoleezza Rice served as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State in the George W. Bush administration. She now directs the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, which held today's virtual program, in a conversation with Stephen Hadley, who was National Security Advisor to President George W. Bush. On the presidential campaign trail today, former President Donald Trump, Republican nominee, holds rallies in Tempe, Arizona, and Reno, Nevada, where he'll be focusing on Nevada's Asian American voters. And Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee, has a rally in Atlanta, Georgia, with former President Barack Obama and musician Bruce Springsteen. Vice President Harris spoke to reporters today in Philadelphia about some new endorsements.
Well, let me start by saying I'm really very proud to announce that we've had some endorsements this morning as we've been rolling out endorsements, but two leaders in the Republican Party, the mayor of Waukesha, and then, of course, former Representative Fred Upton. And this continues to be, I think, evidence of the fact that people who have been leaders in our country, regardless of their political party, understand what's at stake. And they are weighing in courageously, in many cases, in support of what we need to have, which is a President of the United States who understands the obligation to uphold the Constitution of the United States and our democracy. As for last night, yet again, Trump not showing up, refused to be a part of a CNN debate, and clearly his staff has been saying he's exhausted, and the sad part about that is he's trying to be President of the United States, probably the toughest job in the world, and he's exhausted. I said last night what I mean, which is the American people are being presented with a very serious decision. And it includes what we must understand will happen starting on January 20th in this choice. Either you have the choice of a Donald Trump who will sit in the Oval Office, stewing, plotting revenge, retribution, writing out his enemies list, or what I will be doing, which is responding to folks like the folks last night with a to-do list, understanding the need to work on lifting up the American people, whether it be through the issue of grocery prices and bringing them down, or investing in our economy, investing in our small businesses, investing in our families.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, speaking to reporters today in Philadelphia. She was referring to the town hall hosted by CNN in Pennsylvania that she attended the night before. She took a few questions today from the reporters, including one on immigration and border security.
Madam Vice President, this topic was brought up last night, but will construction of a southern border wall continue in your administration?
I will tell you that my highest priority is to put the resources into ensuring that our border is secure, which is why I've been very clear. I'm going to bring back up, as president, that bipartisan border security bill and make sure that it is brought to my desk so I can sign it into law. The biggest issue that we have right now is that Donald Trump has stood in the way of what would have been a proven part of the solution to the bigger problem, which is that we have a broken immigration system in America and we need to fix it. And we have the tools at hand, but we have on the other side of this election Donald Trump, who would prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem. I intend to fix the problem in a way that is just about practical solutions that are within our arm's reach if we have the commitment to do it.
Vice President Kamala Harris, Democratic presidential nominee, with reporters today in Philadelphia. Associated Press reporting from Duluth, Georgia, Donald Trump implored supporters at a Georgia rally to vote for him with an early ballot or in person on Election Day in a state that will be crucial in the presidential election. Trump said at the event Wednesday, organized by conservative provocateur Charlie Kirk and the group he founded, just vote whichever way you want to do it. Article continues, but the rest of the former president's speech and the lineup that preceded him framed the 2024 presidential election in stark terms. The Republican nominee insulted Democrat Kamala Harris, while Kirk and other speakers used religious references and described the vice president and her Democratic Party as evil. That's the reporting from Associated Press. Here's part of Donald Trump's speech Wednesday night in Duluth, Georgia.
And I'd like to begin by asking a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? That was very unanimous, wasn't it? The answer is no. By any standard, the answer is no, and I'm here today with a message of hope for all Americans. With your vote in this election, I will end inflation, I will stop the invasion of criminals into our country, and I will bring back the American dream. I'm going to bring it back very quickly. Our country is being destroyed and crippled by Kamala Harris, a person that got no votes, no votes. Therefore, she's a threat to democracy. But together, we're going to fix our nation, and we're going to fix our nation fast. With your support on November 5th, America will be bigger, better, bolder, richer, safer, and stronger than ever before. This election is a choice between whether we will have 4 more years of incompetence, failure, and disaster, or whether we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country. After all the catastrophes she has caused, Kamala Harris can't say one thing that you'd do differently. You saw that? What would you do differently? I can't think of anything. This is the worst president in the history of our country and the worst vice president in the history of our country. And Wrong Track just came out. 89% wrong track. I want to know, who are the 11%? Who are they? Where are they? I'm asking you to be excited about the future of our country again. This will be America's new golden age. And remember, every problem facing us can be solved, but now the fate of our nation is in your hands. In Georgia, you have to stand up and you have to tell Kamala Harris that, Kamala, you've done a horrible job. You're the worst ever. There's never been anybody like you. You can't put 2 sentences together. The world is laughing at us because of you and Crooked Joe. Kamala, you're fired. Get out. Get out. Get out. You're fired.
Donald Trump, former president and Republican presidential nominee, Wednesday night in Duluth, Georgia, a rally organized by the group Turning Point Action. C-SPAN's Washington Journal morning program has been taking a closer look at the 7 presidential battleground states this week, 1 per day. This morning was Nevada, and one of the guests was Jessica Hill, politics reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal.
Nevada has long been considered a bellwether. We are pretty accurate in predicting who will be the next president. When Nevada chooses its presidential candidate, it usually ends up being that person who goes into the White House. On only 2 occasions since 1912, I believe, have we not picked the winner. And that was with Gerald Ford and Hillary Clinton in 2016. So we have just a pretty long track record of picking the president. And one of the reasons why it's so close here is we have a pretty even-keeled balance of political parties. We see a lot of split ticket voting also in Nevada. I think a lot of voters tend to vote not just based off of the party that they identify with. As you said, there are a lot of nonpartisan voters here. But they also kind of choose based off of personality, a specific issue that they think that the candidate is doing better with. So you see a lot of kind of those split ticket voting records. In 2022, we saw a Democrat, Senator Cortez Masto, win her election, but then we also saw Republican Governor Joe Lombardo defeat a Democratic incumbent for governor. So that kind of just shows how close these races can be and how we're really a little bit more dynamic in our thought processes here.
And what are the key issues that are animating voters in Las Vegas? Is it the same as what you would expect nationally?
A little bit, yeah. I think the housing crisis, we are more affected by this than I think elsewhere you'll find in the country. We struggle with kind of this balance of growth and then also conservation with our water. And we also are I think like 80% of Nevada's land is federally owned. And so there's a lot of processes that have to take place in order for those to be opened up for housing. So we're a little bit more affected by this housing crisis. And just talking with voters here, you'll find that they struggle to pay rent, their rent will increase, and they can't afford to buy a home. And those are the big issues that I hear. Also, the economy, gas prices, and the cost of food and groceries. Those tend to be big issues.
Latino voters make up about 20% of the electorate in Nevada. Where are they going? I mean, with the understanding that they're not a monolithic bloc, but what are you seeing among Latino voters?
It's hard to tell right now how they're feeling about things. Obviously, we don't want to paint with a broad brush, but both of the campaigns have really tried hard to win them over this year. Trump just a couple of days ago held a roundtable in Las Vegas geared toward Hispanic voters and talking about issues that they care about. The Harris campaign has long tried to, win them over as well. They've held different events at, Mexican restaurants, small Latino business owner places. They've also held, football watch parties to kind of just talk with Latino voters in Nevada about the issues that matter to them.
Jessica Hill, politics reporter for the Las Vegas Review-Journal on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning, part of our week-long series on battleground states. It continues Friday with Pennsylvania and finishes Saturday with North Carolina. You can listen live to the Washington Journal each morning. The segment on the battleground states begins at 8 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN radio and television. And you can get the full programs later on C-SPAN's Campaign Trail podcast, available wherever you find your podcasts. Story from Reason magazine. Last night, 3 people who know they're not going to be president, but are running for the office anyway, took the stage in Los Angeles for a spirited third-party debate. At the debate hosted by Free and Equal, Libertarian Party nominee Chase Oliver, Green Party candidate Jill Stein, and Randall Terry of the Constitution Party argued about whether the government should get much smaller, much larger, or be totally reoriented toward Judeo-Christian values. Being the ideological gadflies that they are, the third-party candidates all made refreshingly undistilled cases for their contrasting visions of government. That was the article from Reason magazine. C-SPAN covered this debate. Here's part of it.
What do you think is the most important topic for this election that is not being talked about? And I think it's Jill, Dr. Stein.
I think, we're in an expanding war right now, an expanding and very dangerous war, growing out of the genocide in Gaza by the State of Israel, which is effectively acting as our proxy. We are supplying the weapons, the military aid, the diplomatic cover, the intelligence, and Israel is on the verge of attacking Iran. Russia is likely to be brought into this war. We are sitting on a powder keg on the verge of World War III. This needs to be debated. It's absolutely being ignored. This is why we all need to be in this election.
Thank you. Chase Oliver. Chase Oliver, please.
So I will echo Dr. Jill Stein's sentiments right here. The thing that's not being talked about in the debates between the debate between Harris and Trump, or any of their surrogates, or anything that's going on, is the fact that we are a warfare state. The fact that we have money being made, military corporate warfare that helps to benefit giant corporate interests by exporting death and misery around the world, destabilizing the world, and bringing the world against the United States and its people. It needs to be talked about enough, and we don't have people who are brave enough to tear down the warfare state on the main stage. I'm glad we're here doing it.
Randall Terry.
The Democrat war on children. The Democrat Party is at war with children. Kill them till the day of birth by abortion. Indoctrinate them in school that all white people are racist, or that communism is good, and that socialism is perfect, and that capitalism is bad. Give them a condom or a pill and some pornography and say, here's birth control, and go have some fun. You've had sex education. We'll get you an abortion behind your mom's back. We'll give you the pill behind your mom and dad's back. This country is at war with children, and it is spearheaded by the Democrat Party, which is why it must be destroyed.
From Wednesday night's third-party presidential debate in Los Angeles, hosted by the Free and Equal Foundation. In reverse order, you heard Randall Terry of the Constitution Party, Chase Oliver from the Libertarian Party, and Jill Stein from the Green Party. The entire debate runs about 2.5 hours. You can find the full video at our website, cspan.org. A New York Times article from last week has this paragraph: in every battleground state, there is at least one third-party or independent presidential candidate on the ballot. None of these candidates will come anywhere close to winning the presidency, but their presence on the ballot in just a few states could take enough votes away from the major party candidates to tip the balance of the Electoral College and the election in what is known as the spoiler effect. That from the New York Times. Former presidential candidate Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, is running for re-election as senator this year, and he debated his Republican opponent, Gerald Molloy, government contractor and U.S. Army veteran, Wednesday night. It was sponsored by Vermont Public and Vermont Digger. It had moderators, but at one point the candidates had an opportunity to ask each other questions. Here's one of the exchanges.
Senator Sanders, you are 83 and seeking another 6-year term. You've been in Congress 34 years and have delivered one bill of significance other than post offices. That was 10 years ago, and you co-sponsored it into law with Senator McCain. You have talked more than 40 years about health care, housing, education, and you have not delivered legislation into law to improve these areas. Their costs have all skyrocketed. Would you please discuss now how now, at age 83, as an independent socialist, you are all of a sudden going to start delivering legislative results, not just talk, to lower health care, housing, and education?
Let's not be an ageist, Mr. Molloy. It's true, I am 83. I don't know how old you are, but 62. I am. All right. Well, you're a very young man, but I am feeling just fine. Thank you very much. We don't need ageism here. Now, in terms of my record, let's see. When COVID hit the United States, and Donald Trump, by the way, played a horrendous role in helping us prepare for that terrible pandemic, as chairman of the Budget Committee, I helped pass the American Rescue Plan. And that plan put money into people's pockets who had no money to feed their kids. That money put money into hospitals, into universities, into colleges. It prevented the eviction of people. It lowered the childhood poverty rate by 40%. In fact, some people regard it as the most consequential piece of legislation in the modern history of this country. I helped write that. All right. In terms of what we're doing here in Vermont, I mentioned the expansion of community health centers. We expanded community-based outreach clinics for veterans in Brattleboro and in Newport. We are lowering right now the cost of prescription drugs. If you're a senior right now, you're not going to pay more than $35 for insulin, something that I work very, very hard on. We're lowering the cost of asthma inhalers. We're taking on the drug companies and having some success, not as much as I would want, in lowering the cost of prescription drugs.
Thank you, Senator. Do you have a follow-up?
I do. Yeah, $1.9 trillion for ARPA. That's the reason we have the 40-year high inflation that's still with us today. One drug lowered the price. 4,200 have gone up. Would you please answer the question? How are you actually going to lower housing, healthcare, and education costs through legislation?
Well, we're going to pass, what we're going to do right now is passing the Community Health Center Act, which don't look at me, where we are expanding community health centers. We're bringing more doctors, nurses, mental health providers into our communities, which will finally provide health care for the people who need it. And by the way, when we talk about education, it is my view that it is somewhat absurd that young people are graduating college deeply in debt, that if you want to graduate medical school, you may be $400,000 or $500,000 in debt. That does not make any sense to me in a competitive global economy where we want the best educated workforce that we can have. So we are working hard on all of those issues.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, running for a fourth 6-year term, debating Republican Gerald Molloy Wednesday night. The Cook Political Report rates this as a solid Democrat seat. Senator Sanders is an independent, but caucuses with the Democrats. One of the competitive toss-up U.S. House races, according to the Cook Political Report, that could determine which party has a majority after the election is Pennsylvania's 8th District. Incumbent Democrat Matt Cartwright is facing Rob Bresnahan, whose career experience includes being chief financial officer and CEO of a family business and electrical contracting company. They debated Tuesday night.
We hear constantly, almost every day, again on the streets of northeastern PA, people are struggling to pay for staples. Gas, milk, eggs, everything is up. If you look at the numbers from the economy, they look pretty good, right? But people are still concerned about inflation, saying, what can be done about it? What will you do in Congress to fight inflation, bring it down to where people feel they're not feeling it, quite frankly? What will you do to curb inflation?
I think you made a great point. It's the kitchen table issues. It's the groceries, it's the fuel for your vehicle, it's your prescription medication. And you want to talk about our seniors living on fixed income. I mean, the only thing that's eroding away at Social Security is the cost of living. First and foremost, you need to have a balanced budget. And it's happened before in the past, and it can happen again with the right leadership. Secondly, you're looking at energy costs. That is the biggest driver of the majority of inflation. Every single thing we own comes on a truck. Everything uses electricity. So we can't vilify fossil fuels and the ability of natural resources, specifically within the state of Pennsylvania. When you start talking about the struggles, and that's the first thing we hear when we knock on doors. We've knocked on 24,000 doors. We talk to real people every single day. And the first thing that everyone says is, I can't afford my groceries. I can't afford rent. I have mortgages. You have credit card debt for the second consecutive year over $1 trillion. We have a national debt over $35.5 trillion. And you're looking at what our expenditures are. We're spending $900 billion a year on debt service. That's as much, or if not more, than the United States defense budget. We have to be able to erode away and not send billions and billions and billions of dollars to every other country on the planet when our own people at home are struggling. But you need to have a balanced budget. That is what the majority of this boils down to. Sometimes the government just needs to say, no, we can't afford it. We have to take care of our own people. And that's certainly something that I'm going to do.
Mr. Cartwright.
Look, yes, the economists are telling us that it's all getting better, but it sure doesn't feel like it. Not yet. That's why I voted to stop gas companies from gouging people at the pump. That's why I helped pass a bipartisan law to crack down on shipping profiteering. That's why I helped pass a middle-class tax cut for child tax credit. By the way, I have never voted for a tax increase in my time in public life. But that's why we took on Big Pharma. You know, under the Inflation Reduction Act, we took on Big Pharma. People are shocked to know that it was American law for 20 years that the government couldn't negotiate drug prices with Big Pharma. Why? Because Big Pharma had the ability with their lobbyists to make it so. So whatever they wanted to charge under Medicare Part D, that's what they charged and that's what they got. For the first time, we were able to stand up, muster our courage, and stand up to Big Pharma and pull this off with the Inflation Reduction Act. As a result, there are 10 drugs that have to be negotiated with Medicare. One of them is insulin. It's capped at $35 a month. And another one is one that a lady who's here, Denise Parashak is here. And where are you, Denise? There you are. And she was on an ad. She saves $1,000 a year because of that IRA. And it's not a lot to Big Pharma, but it's a lot to Mr. and Mrs. Parashak, I know.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright.
Well, I think it's important to recognize the impacts of pharmaceuticals. And actually in the Inflation Reduction Bill, one of the only things that I support is the prescription Medicare, the prescription capping of insulin pricing. But you've been a member of Congress for over 12 years. You've voted through appropriations to continue to send billions and billions of dollars to every other place on the planet. You've been a part of paying $150 billion to take care of migrants when our own people in Asheville, North Carolina got $750.
Thank you, Mr. Bresnahan. Mr. Cartwright, 30 seconds.
We've heard a lot of falsehoods about how much money went to illegal immigrants. There was a falsehood on one of those ads that I don't know who ran it, about $4 billion going to illegal immigrants. And that was under the American Rescue Plan is what they cited. utter rubbish. There was nothing in that bill directing any funds or budgeting any funds for illegal immigrants. They just made it up, and they cited a phony right-wing website as their proof. Nonsense.
Congressman Matt Cartwright, Democrat of Pennsylvania, seeking a 7th term, debating Republican opponent Rob Bresnahan Tuesday night. It was hosted by WVIA-TV in Scranton. This is one of the closely watched races for the U.S. House in the country, polls showing it could go either way. You can find the full video of all of C-SPAN's campaign coverage at our video library, cspan.org. House races, Senate races, governor's races, and the presidential race as well. One other bit of election news from CBS. A survey conducted by the Pew Research Center found fewer Americans plan to vote by mail than they did in 2020 amid the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, a record share of voters, 39%, cast their ballots by mail. That 2020 figure rose to 46% counting absentee ballots. This year, 28% of voters plan to vote by mail. From CBS News. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Friday nights, watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, a weekly roundup of C-SPAN's campaign coverage, providing a one-stop shop to discover what the candidates across the country are saying to voters, along with first-hand accounts from political reporters, updated poll numbers, fundraising data, and campaign ads. Watch C-SPAN's 2024 Campaign Trail, Friday nights at 7:30 p.m. Eastern on C-SPAN, online at cspan.org, or download as a podcast on C-SPAN Now, our free mobile app, or wherever you get your podcasts. C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of politics.
Welcome back to Washington Today. You can get us as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. Story from the Washington Post. The White House is directing the Pentagon and intelligence agencies to increase their adoption of artificial intelligence, expanding the Biden administration's efforts to curb technological competition from China and other adversaries. We'll talk with the reporter who wrote that article about the new memo from the administration in just a couple of minutes. First, the White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan talked about it at the National War College in Washington, D.C. today.
Our lead is not guaranteed. It is not preordained, and it is not enough to just guard the progress we've made, as historic as it's been. We have to be faster in deploying AI in our national security enterprise than America's rivals are in theirs. They are in a persistent quest to leapfrog our military and intelligence capabilities. And the challenge is even more acute because they are unlikely to be bound by the same principles and responsibilities and values that we are. The stakes are high. If we don't act more intentionally to seize our advantages, if we don't deploy AI more quickly and more comprehensively to strengthen our national security, we risk squandering our hard-earned lead. Even if we have the best AI models, but our competitors are faster to deploy, we could see them seize the advantage in using AI capabilities against our people, our forces, and our partners and allies. We could have the best team, but lose because we didn't put it on the field. We could see advantages we built over decades in other domains, like space and undersea operations, be reduced or eroded entirely with AI-enabled technology. And for all our strengths, there remains a risk of strategic surprise. We have to guard against that, which is why I'm here today. Our new National Security Memorandum on AI seeks to address exactly this set of challenges. And as rising national security leaders, you will be charged with implementing it with no time to lose. So in the balance of my remarks, I want to spend a few minutes explaining the memorandum's 3 main lines of effort: securing American leadership in AI, harnessing AI for national security, and strengthening international AI partnerships.
White House National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at the National War College in Washington, D.C. Washington Post technology reporter Garrett DeVink has been writing about the Artificial Intelligence National Security Memo from the Biden administration. He joins us now by phone. Thanks for being with us. What does this memo do?
So the memo essentially is the Biden administration, the White House, telling the military, the national security agencies, look, you guys need to think about AI. You need to find new ways to use it. You need to experiment with it more. And also, when you're doing that, make sure you don't break the law or violate American civil rights. And so there are not a ton of really detailed specifics. They don't say, use AI in XYZ way, but they just say, look, you guys really need to be thinking about this. This is super important technology. This is vital to sort of geopolitical competition with China in particular, and you really need to be thinking about it.
That balancing act between speeding up adoption and making sure you don't violate the democratic norms, how easy or hard will it be?
I mean, it's tricky, right? And I think this is something that, people who are sort of concerned about, the use of AI by militaries in particular, by law enforcement agencies, and even just by commercial companies, you can kind of look at this and say, well, maybe this is even contradictory, right? Because, for years now, earlier forms of AI technology, people have been raising red flags about them. I mean, the government has been using image recognition technology to look at satellite images for years now and to sort of look for targets. Now, of course, we're not necessarily in a point yet where the U.S. military is using AI to actually make decisions about, launching missiles and, actually doing things like that. But there's this concern that, you're pushing the government to use more AI. Are other countries that the U.S. sees itself as in competition with are also doing this. And, maybe it's not enough to just say, oh, please don't break the rules, while also pushing forward with everything.
This is obviously aimed at countries like China. How will China view this? As a threat or just par for the course?
Yeah, I mean, China has been pretty, open about they're very critical of how the U.S. has been so aggressive on the global stage when it comes to AI. The U.S. has actually, barred the export of certain computer chips that are really, really important, essentially vital to building and running, really, really high-tech AI. U.S. companies are not allowed to export those chips to China, and China has, raised a lot of anger about this. They say the U.S. is being unreasonable, that, this technology is important for scientific, commercial developments, and the U.S. is just sort of painting it all with the broad brush. The U.S. has been very upfront saying, look, we think AI is super important and we have the lead when it comes to it. We have the best companies. We have the smartest researchers. We have the best technology. And we're not going to lose that lead. At the same time, China has made, developing AI technology a core national priority. They explicitly want to be the leader in AI technology, whatever that may mean, in the coming years. And so I think you can look at this AI national security memorandum as sort of the U.S. government also saying that and saying, look, we've seen this challenge from, what we see as our rival, and we need to keep this up and sort of, putting the pressure on people who work for the U.S. government to think about this and to find ways to use AI and, make sure it's a core part of their mission.
We're talking with Washington Post technology reporter Garrett DeVink. Why this memo now, besides that it's getting near the end of President Biden's term?
Yeah, so I think it's, in terms of the messaging that the Biden administration has been doing on AI, for over a year now, about a year ago, they put out a big executive order that in a lot of ways was thematically similar. Essentially, they're saying, we think AI is really important. We think it's going to change the world, and we're doing something about it. And again, a lot of those specifics are not super tangible because the technology is still changing. I mean, there's still people out there who say, AI is cool, but it's not going to, change everything about the world. And a lot of the people who are sort of singing, the praises about AI being as important as electricity or as important as the internet itself are also the people who are selling AI. And so, that's also an element here. But I think the Biden administration, they see that AI is something that's captured the commercial world's attention. It's captured the military world's attention, and they really want a message that they are on top of this, that they understand this technology, that they're doing something about it. They don't want to be criticized as being, lagging behind or letting potential adversaries get ahead of them on this technology. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of this stuff now, even though some of the specifics aren't super fleshed out yet.
And a final question, Congress has been studying AI for some time. Are they near writing a bill, and would they cover what's been covered in this memo?
Yeah, so Congress has written a lot of bills. They just haven't passed any of them, right? And so, the same sort of legislative, deadlock that we've seen on so many other issues at the federal level in the U.S., is also applying to artificial intelligence. And it's actually fallen to, the California legislature and other state legislatures to actually pass bills. And, one of the things that was mentioned in this memo is some of the commitments that big AI companies, Google, Apple, Microsoft, OpenAI have made voluntarily to sort of make sure that the stuff that they put out there is safe, that it's not going to cause harm, and it's not going to be able to be used by other governments' militaries against the U.S. But those commitments are all voluntary at this point. And, I actually asked some of the officials, do you want to move this from a voluntary commitment to actually hard requirements for U.S. companies? And they said, look, we're working with with Congress. We're working to bring new legislation. So, it's still very much I think, again, people can look at the last few years and the absolute lack of tech regulation that has been passed by Congress in all sorts of issues and say, maybe it won't actually happen with AI. At the same time, it is an issue that seems to be fairly bipartisan. Politicians from all over the political spectrum really seem to be latching on this idea that AI is important, that it needs to be regulated. And I think regular people, too, are concerned about big tech companies that already have so much power just being able to do whatever they want when it comes to AI. And so I do think, we'll have to see, but it is possible in the next year or so we might see some legislation on this front.
Garrett DeVink, technology reporter with The Washington Post. You can find his articles at WashingtonPost.com and on X at Garrett D. Thank you very much.
Of course, no problem.
White House National Economic Advisor Lael Brainard talked about the economic policy implications of the Artificial Intelligence National Security Memo at Semaphore News' World Economy Summit in Washington, D.C. today.
Your office put out a report today on artificial intelligence. Tell us what are the key headlines that people should take away from that as it relates to productivity and growth and the technological drivers of the economy.
Yeah, so I think, look, the Biden-Harris administration has been very focused on creating the right environment. What we put out today was a report that said the national security community has determined that preeminence in the frontier models of generative artificial intelligence is vital to our national security. And for that reason, on the economic side, what it means is that we need, as the public sector, to be a partner to the private sector in sustaining the foundations that have enabled generative AI to develop here in the U.S. economy and for the U.S. to have leadership. So what does that mean? That means computational resources, investments in data centers that are based on new sources of clean energy, new additional investments in transmission. It means having leading edge semiconductor manufacture here in the U.S. enabled by the CHIPS and Science Act so that we can continue. We already have the most advanced designs here in the U.S. We need to be able to also make sure those supply chains are diversified and we have leading edge manufacturing here in the U.S.
Lael Brainard is the White House National Economic Advisor, interviewed by John Hilsenrath, former Wall Street Journal senior writer, now Semaphore News contributor, at today's Semaphore World Economy Summit in Washington, D.C. On Wall Street today, the Dow down 140, NASDAQ up 138, S&P up 12. In the Middle East, from the Times of Israel, Mossad chief David Barnea will travel to Doha on Sunday to try to restart discussions on a deal to release Israeli hostages held in Gaza and halt the war between Israel and Palestinian terror group Hamas. In Doha, Barnea will meet with CIA Chief Bill Burns and Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office said in a statement Thursday evening. The statement said at the meeting, the parties will discuss the various options for advancing the negotiations for the release of the hostages held by Hamas against the backdrop of recent developments. That was from the Times of Israel. Earlier, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken announced at a news conference in Doha, Qatar, with the Qatari foreign minister, the negotiations for the ceasefire and hostage release deal will be starting back up.
We had an opportunity today to talk about the way forward on the effort to bring the hostages home and to get a ceasefire. Partly this involves an assessment of exactly where Hamas stands in the wake of the death of Sinwar. We talked about that. We talked about options to capitalize on this moment and next steps to move the process forward. And I anticipate that our negotiators will be getting together in the coming days. But as you heard the Prime Minister say, it's also essential, even as we're working on that effort, that we continue to develop a plan for what follows, so that Israel can withdraw from Gaza, so that Hamas cannot, so that they can rebuild their lives and rebuild their futures under Palestinian leadership. Throughout this trip, including with the Prime Minister and the Emir today, we discussed the concrete ideas that we've been developing for security, for governance, for reconstruction in Gaza. This is a moment for every country to decide what role it's prepared to play and what contributions it can make in moving Gaza from war to peace. And as I said the other day, I think this is a pivotal moment for that question because Israel has accomplished the strategic goals that it set out for itself, making sure that October 7th and the horrors can never happen again by effectively dismantling the military organization of Hamas. It succeeded in doing that and bringing to justice its leaders, those who perpetrated the horrors of October 7th, notably Sinwar. And now that that's been accomplished, this is a moment to work to end this war, to make sure all the hostages are home, and to build a better future for people in Gaza.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a news conference in Qatar with the Qatari foreign minister. Secretary also announced $135 million in new U.S. humanitarian aid for the Palestinians. Story from CNN, dozens of countries and international bodies, including the United States, France, and the United Nations, have pledged $1 billion to Lebanon during a humanitarian aid conference hosted by Paris. And finally, on Washington Today, from the Arizona Republic newspaper, President Joe Biden is expected to formally apologize Friday for the abuses committed against Native boarding school students over the past century, a historic step long sought by former students and their families during a visit to the Gila River Indian community. Under Biden and his Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, the federal government completed a 3-year study that investigated the failed federal policy of sending Native children as young as age 4 to faraway boarding schools, policy that led to generations of trauma. That was reporting from the Arizona Republic. Interior Secretary Deb Haaland previewed the president's speech during a news conference on Air Force One as they all flew from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix.
Before we take your questions, I want to talk about the Federal Indian Boarding School Initiative. For more than a century, tens of thousands of Indigenous children, as young as 4 years old, were taken from their families and communities and forced into boarding schools run by the U.S. government and religious institutions. This includes my own family. For decades, this terrible chapter was hidden from our history books. But now our administration's work will ensure that no one will ever forget. I'm happy to talk more about our investigative report, the year-long effort across Indian country that we called the Road to Healing, where we went to 12 different communities and heard directly from survivors and descendants, and the work ahead. But I just want to say that foundational to this work has been the idea, far-fetched as it might have been, that the federal government would acknowledge and apologize for the trauma and intergenerational impacts that these boarding schools, these places of horror, cause.
Interior Secretary Deb Haaland speaking to reporters on Air Force One, flying with the president from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix. The president expected to make that speech and that apology tomorrow in Arizona. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.